Stand. This Coroner's Court is now sitting.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honour.
Yes, Ms Ward.
Your Honour, today's proceedings are the coronial inquiry into the Little L Laguna fire. I appear with Mr Wilcox as counsel assisting, Your Honour, and there's a different appearance today for the state authorities.
Yes, Ms Woodland.
Your Honour, my name is Woodland. I appear for the Commissioner of the Rural Fire Service, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and the Forestry Corporation of New South Wales.
Thanks very much. Ms Ward.
Your Honour, these are the opening submissions for the coronial inquiry into the cause and origin of the Little L fire. In late 2019, this fire burnt across both the Cessnock local government area and the Singleton local government area, encompassing the lands of the Wonnarua people. The Little L fire was originally named the Stockyard Creek fire, due, as one might expect, to its proximity to Stockyard Creek. As a result, some of the material contained within the coronial brief of evidence that will shortly be tendered still refers to the Stockyard Creek fire. We'll now have brought up on screen a map which our instructing solicitors have obtained from Google Maps, and it's going to help Your Honour orientate to the scene, in particular of the Yengo National Park. It'll just be one moment, Your Honour. I think the technology is as cold as I am this morning, so things are taking a little longer. If we think we're unable to bring the map up on the screen, we can just move on. Okay. Hopefully it will load shortly. There we have it, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Your Honour will see towards the upper midpoint of the map the Yengo National Park, marked in green, and then to the west, the Wallamai National Park is displayed. The Blue Mountains National Park then sits right to the bottom of the photo, and Your Honour can see the Darug National Park to the southeast of Yengo, moving all the way across to the coast, and just using some of those population centres along the coastline there, Your Honour will be able to see the entrance as part of the Central Coast, and then of course as we move to the north along the coastline, Your Honour would ultimately reach Newcastle. So Your Honour, Stockyard Creek is located in the Yengo National Park itself, but the creek is northeast of an area called Finchley Lookout. The Yengo National Park itself, as you might almost conclude from that Google map, stretches from down near from Wiseman's Ferry in the south up to the Hunter Valley. It features tall rocky ridges and steep gorges, as well as a number of Aboriginal sacred sites and rock engravings that have great cultural significance to the local Aboriginal communities. The Yengo National Park is one of 8 conservation areas that together make up the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. Covering 1 million hectares, this World Heritage Area was included in the World Heritage List in December 2000 for its remarkable geographic, botanic and cultural values. Within the Yengo National Park itself, there are more than 90 different eucalypt species found, some 13% of all eucalypt species in the world. Yengo is also home to a great diversity of wildlife, including around 50 species of mammals, such as wombats, wallaroos, koalas and gliding possums, and over 200 species of birds. Turning to the Little L complex of fires. The Little L fire sits within a larger grouping of fires called the Little L complex fire. That is, the Little L fire was later jointly managed as part of an amalgamated complex of fires, at least some of which physically merged as they burnt, forming a much larger fire. This is how the matter is formally listed on the court list and identified within the brief and related documents. In order to make sense of this, one needs to understand something about the naming convention for bushfires. Sometimes separate fires will physically merge and be managed as one larger fire from an RFS incident management perspective. Some of those smaller merging fires might then be recorded as being extinguished or out within the records, even though the fire has physically continued to burn as part of a larger fire. So here, the Little L complex fire in fact refers to the merger or amalgamation of 7 fires during the period from 1 through until 22 December 2019. The 7 fires that ultimately came to make up the complex were the Stockyard Creek fire, which was later named the Little L fire, the Paddock Run fire, the Milbradale Road fire, which was later named the Drews Creek fire, the Vault Creek fire, the Blue Gum fire, the Newfound fire, and the Werron Creek 2 fire. This is best illustrated from a map contained within the brief on page 192 of the brief of evidence, which represents fire progression mapping as at 25 November 2019. So, Your Honour will see that the Stockyard Creek fire is to the top right of the large yellow fire mapped on that page. The Stockyard Creek fire at this point in time had not yet been renamed the Little L fire. Your Honour will also be able to see the Werron Creek fire, which sits slightly above Stockyard Creek, and then to the west, the Werron Creek 2 fire, which later became part of the Little L complex of fires. You'll also be able to see to the north the Milbradale Road fire, which was later renamed the Drews Creek fire, and separately the Drews Creek fire. So those 2 fires later took on the name of the Drews Creek fire. Your Honour can also see from this map how these small fires to the north were very much dwarfed by the reach of the Gospers Mountain fire, already burning to the south and heading towards the southeast, which, as Your Honour can see, Gosford is marked on the coastline to the eastern range of that map. On 1 December 2019, the Little L fire was renamed the Little L Complex fire when it merged with the Blue Gum fire. The Newfound fire was then amalgamated within the Little L complex on 3 December 2019, followed by the Vault Creek fire on 6 December 2019, and then the Milbradale Road fire, later renamed the Drews Creek fire, and the Werron Creek 2 fire on 7 December 2019. So this complex of fires is made up of several smaller fires that came to join together in some respects, but all of which were managed under the one fire for RFS purposes. If one now has regard to the map that will shortly come up on the screen in court, taken from page 223 of the brief, it shows that by 12 December 2019, so about 2 weeks after the map that we were just looking at, by 12 December 2019, all of these fires had largely joined and were being managed under the name of the Little L Complex Fire. The Paddock Run fire was then still being managed as a separate fire to the west of the Little L Complex, but this too was amalgamated into the Little L Complex on 22 December. Your Honour will also see from this map that, at least according to this mapping, the northeastern boundary of the Gospers Mountain fire had reached the southwestern boundary of the Little L Complex of fires by 12 December 2019. And on this close-up, Your Honour can see the Paddock Run fire, which was still being separately managed at this time, as the lime green, sitting in between the Little L Complex and then the fire marked Kerry Ridge. The Little L Complex fire burned for approximately 9 weeks, damaging an area of approximately 171,400 hectares. Between at least 27 to 30 structures were destroyed or damaged in connection with the fire, including many homes and buildings in Laguna, Wollombi and Paynes Crossing. Many more homes and buildings were threatened. This is not a precise figure because different accounts of the number of properties actually lost vary amongst the statements contained within the brief. Fortunately, no deaths are recorded as having occurred as a result of this fire. The hearing today will not explore in any real detail the firefighting response to the fire or why certain decisions were or were not made at particular points in time. Instead, the focus of the hearing today is upon the cause and origin of the Little L fire itself. A chronology of events that I will shortly outline will very broadly address such matters as the progression of the Little L fire in its early days, as it became established within difficult terrain within the Yengo National Park, and will briefly outline the later efforts to prioritise protecting life and property in the townships of Wollombi, Laguna and Paynes Crossing in challenging conditions. The chronology will briefly refer to the other fires burning at the same time as the Little L fire and is already illustrated in the maps that we've shown this morning. This is important because multiple fires were being fought simultaneously across the state, even extending beyond the fires visible in the maps that we've already displayed, and placing a strain on available firefighting resources, including aerial resources deployed to try and contain fires in inaccessible locations. The purpose of the broad chronology within the opening is only to give context to the court's cause and origin inquiry. It is not to suggest to Your Honour that Your Honour's inquiry will extend to decisions made in the course of fighting the Little L fire. Once the court has completed a consideration of the cause and origin for this fire and the other fires across the state of New South Wales in the 2019-2020 bushfire season, the court will review the evidence and issues raised in each matter and will determine which issues should proceed to further and more detailed consideration via a representative case study. The hearing into representative case studies will occur at the Coroners Court at Lidcombe, commencing 5 September 2022. Anyone who seeks more details can watch the opening submissions made by counsel assisting on 25 August 2021 via the available links on the Coroners Court of New South Wales website. Conduct of the hearing. Given that the scope of issues to be considered today is limited to the cause of the Little L fire and its area of origin, the court will hear from 3 witnesses only, namely Plainclothes Senior Constable Katie Platt, the rural crime investigator attached to the Hunter Valley Police District, who is the officer in charge of the Little L fire investigation. Paul Sanderlands, project officer at the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service, who performed the role of Air Attack Supervisor North in the early stages of the Little L fire and at the scene of the nearby Gospers Mountain fire. Mr Sanderlands conducted preliminary mapping of the area of origin for the Little L fire and was involved in early suppression efforts when the fire was in its infancy. The third witness will be Senior Constable Yost Price, Mapping Operations, New South Wales Police, who undertook a review of lightning strike data and mapped this to reflect 3 relevant lightning strikes in the area of origin. Moving then to the chronology. Although this will ultimately be a matter for Your Honour to determine, the Little L fire is believed to have commenced on or before the morning of 25 November 2019 as a result of a lightning strike. That is, whilst the fire was first reported as going on the morning of 25 November 2019, it may well have started hours or even days or more beforehand. This is based in part upon the fact that between 22 and 25 November of that year, a series of storms passed over the area and a significant number of lightning strikes were recorded. Precise details of the number of lightning strikes will never be known, and figures vary within the brief. For instance, if one has regard to the lightning strike data that will shortly come up on screen, and taken from page 198 of the brief, Your Honour can see fire progression map overlaid with lightning recorded in the vicinity of Stockyard Creek between 11 a.m. on the 22nd of November and 11 a.m. on the 23rd of November 2019. The map depicts a lightning strike in close proximity to Stockyard Creek and others further afield. So you can just see Stockyard Creek is sitting above the area shaded in the green, and there are 5 lightning strikes recorded in the vicinity, one of which is obviously much closer to the Stockyard Creek area than others. In terms of the fire being first reported on 25 November, observations from the automatic weather station at Cessnock Airport, which is the closest observation station to the likely area of origin, showed that the temperature at noon on 25 November 2019 was 30.8 degrees Celsius, relative humidity was 34%, wind speed was 22 kilometres per hour, and wind direction was at 342 degrees. Obviously, Your Honour, there'll be some difference between weather as recorded at Cessnock Airport and weather at the likely area of origin for the fire, but this is the closest observation point we have. On the same morning, fire crews were involved in fighting the Gospers Mountain fire when they became aware of a fire near Stockyard Creek in the Yengo National Park. Paul Sanderlands, project officer with National Parks and Wildlife, was already working as the Air Attack Supervisor North at the time. Mr Sanderlands was responsible for supervising a number of locally burning fires which were in the vicinity of the Gospers Mountain fire, whilst also being responsible for supervising aerial bombing by way of fire suppression on the northern reaches of the Gospers Mountain fire. It is in this context that Mr Sanderlands became aware of a fire burning in the Stockyard Creek area and, at around 8 a.m. on 25 November 2019, he flew out to the fire and identified that there were in fact 3 separate fires in the general area of Stockyard Creek. This is shown on the map now displayed in court, taken from the brief at page 38. Mr. Sanderlands will be giving some further evidence about this today, but it seems that the 3 fires he observed from the air have been marked by Mr. Sanderlands on this map with the small red pins that Your Honour can see. Mr. Sanderlands then sent this image to the incident management team and immediately directed several helicopters to begin water bombing the fires. At around 10:45 a.m. and again at 5 p.m, Mr. Sanderlands mapped the Little L fire by flying around the perimeter of the fire and created further images of fire spread on his iPad, which he also sent through to the incident management team. In the absence of a cause and origin investigation based on a ground level examination of the likely ignition point, Mr. Sanderlands is an important witness in trying to understand how the fire started and where it started. Mr. Sanderlands reports that whilst there is an old vehicle track along the ridge line in proximity to the suspected area of origin for the fire, the track is overgrown and impassable by a motor vehicle. Mr. Sanderlands did not observe any signs of human interference or human presence at the point of origin of the fire. He was of the belief that the location was remote, it was difficult to access from the ground, and fire investigators would have to be winched into the scene by helicopter due to the remoteness of the location. This evidence will, I anticipate, assist Your Honour in considering whether you can exclude the possibility that the fire was deliberately lit or the unintended result of human activity. Furthermore, the evidence of Mr. Sanderlands will likely assist Your Honour in determining the general area of origin for the fire, given that he reported specific GPS coordinates for the fire based on his early mapping of the area. Fire progression. The fire crews worked on fighting the Little L fire over the following days. However, the fire was unable to be distinguished, due in large part to challenging weather conditions and the extreme dryness of the fuels on the ground. Throughout 26 November 2019, the Little L fire remained active. Bucketing from 3 helicopters was deployed. However, winds prevented any crews from being winched into the fireground for remote firefighting purposes. By mid-afternoon, all aircrafts were themselves grounded due to storm activity and strong winds. Pages 350 and 351 of the brief of evidence will now show on the screen. These are aerial photos taken of the Little L fire on 28 November 2019. And Your Honour might easily understand how the remote location would make direct access difficult. Numerous other fires were also competing for firefighting resources, as illustrated in this map. This is a different map to the earlier maps that we have looked at, and it relates to fire progression mapping for the period 28 to 29 November. Your Honour will see a number of the smaller fires that would later coalesce and form the Little L complex of fires are already alight. So we have here the Little L fire, Paddock Run, Milbradale Road, Vault Creek, Blue Gum and Werang Creek 2 fires. And firefighter resources also had to respond to Gospers Mountain, the Kerry Ridge fire, the 3 Mile fire, the Thompson Creek fire, and a number of other smaller fires which might never have been reported to Your Honour because they were not themselves of such size as to trigger the reporting requirement. Then, on 28 November 2019, fire activity had increased due to weather changes, such that by 29 November 2019, Commissioner Shane Fitzsimmons of the Rural Fire Service issued a Section 44 declaration for the Little L fire. By this time, there were approximately 14 remote fires located across the Singleton and Cessnock local government areas that had previously been managed as Class 1 fires by the National Parks and Wildlife Service the Forestry Corporation of New South Wales and the Rural Fire Service. But due to forecast weather conditions, availability of local resources, or perhaps a lack of availability of local resources, and the likely risk of further ignitions, the Section 44 declaration was approved for parts of Singleton and Cessnock. Due to the complexity of the declaration, the incident management team also allocated resources to coordinate many fires outside of the area covered by the declaration. The evidence suggests it proved challenging to sustain the required level of operational activity to manage these fires and the Section 44 fires over this period of time. At the height of the fires impacting upon the Singleton and Cessnock localities, 3 additional fires were being managed by other incident control centres and were threatening many of the localities that the Little L and Paddock Run fires were also threatening at that time. So what that means is, Your Honour, localities were being threatened by different fires coming from different aspects and on different fronts. These additional fires were, of course, the Gospers Mountain Fire, but also the Thompsons Road Fire and the Kerry's Ridge Fire. When the separate fires were taken in combination, the evidence suggests they presented a fire front of over 60 kilometres, stretching from Buckety to Broke. Surrounding communities were facing a threat never before reported in previous fire events. Fires had the potential to heavily impact upon communities at Buckety, Laguna, Wollombi, Murray's Run, and Conjawai in the immediate future. Approximately 2,500 structures were thought likely to come under threat over the following weeks. The complexity of the threat was heightened by the fact that all containment lines previously prepared had been breached, and firefighters were forced to fall back to main roads, villages, and towns. On 1 December 2019, wind gusts of up to 25 kilometres per hour were reported, further increasing erratic fire activity. This is illustrated in part from the photos from page 358 and 359 of the brief, which are now being displayed in court. The smoke eventually reached a point where aircraft could not be deployed, obviously sometime after these aerial photos were taken. The Blue Gum fire was reported as having merged with other fires, and the Little L fire was reported to have spotted across the Stockyard Creek track by this time. Fires in the area were amalgamated and renamed the Little L Complex Fire. At this stage, the fire was reported as being 8,945 hectares in size. Then, on 3 December 2019, the Newfound fire was amalgamated within the Little L complex of fires. The next day, 4 December 1419, the Little L complex fire continued to burn in an east and southeast direction towards Old Convict Road, Werong Creek, Sandy Creek, Stockyard Creek, Bagnalls Creek, Fletcher Creek, Quart Pot Trail, and east and south of Finchley Trail. The fire spread was expected to encroach on properties in the Wollombi and Laguna area overnight, and crews were tasked to protect life and property. Across 6 and 7 December 2019, the Little L Complex fire was amalgamated with the Vault Creek fire, the Drews Creek fire, and the Werong Creek 2 fire. The Paddock Run fire was mapped as spreading 11 kilometres to the east, causing it to coalesce with the Little L complex of fires. It was considered extreme and anomalous fire behaviour for a fire to spread 11 kilometres in a single day at that time. And Your Honour, this fire spread is illustrated in the map now on screen, taken from page 219 of the brief, showing the run of the Little Paddock fire to the east. Again, though, Your Honour, what is considered extreme and anomalous fire behaviour might now change in light of the very many fires the court has investigated across the 2019-2020 season. On 22 December 2019, the Paddock Run fire was officially amalgamated within the Little L complex of fires. It was only on 24 January 2020 at 12:15 p.m. that the Little L complex of fires was authorised as out. Page 234 of the Coronial brief will now be shown on the screen, which depicts the estimated final extent of this complex of fires, joining up, as one can see, with the Gospers Mountain complex. It's estimated, as I've said, that the fire burnt through an area of approximately 171,000 hectares. Moving then to the investigation into cause and origin. There was no early investigation into the cause and origin of the Little L fire by New South Wales Police, and no physical investigation of the suspected area of origin at all by the RFS. Early investigation efforts were hampered by the remote location and limited resources, noting that the area of origin could only be accessed by air. On 15 October 2020, Polair arranged to winch 2 officers attached to the New South Wales Police Crime Scene unit into the area to examine trees for potential lightning strike damage. Unfortunately, whilst en route to the job, Polair was redirected to a critical police incident, and as such, the forensic examination was terminated and a physical examination of the ignition point was not conducted. So the court will shortly hear from the officer in charge, plainclothes Senior Constable Katie Platt, who formed the opinion that the fire was caused by lightning strikes based upon her review of lightning strike data, indicating multiple strikes and thunderstorms in the lead up to 25 November 2019, minimal rain across that period, and also the remote location in which the fire originated. Constable Platt also based her conclusion as to fire cause on the absence of any evidence suggesting an alternate ignition source. Then, in April of 2022, a statement was provided by Senior Constable Yerst Price, Mapping Operations New South Wales Police, following his review of the lightning strike data obtained in relation to the Little L fire. The court will hear from the Senior Constable today about the process he followed in order to identify likely lightning data points between 22 and 25 November 2019. He focused upon lightning strikes that landed within 4 kilometres of the location where Mr. Sanderlands first witnessed the Little L fire, and from this review determined that there were 3 points of interest and at least 3 lightning strikes of interest, which he has plotted on 3 maps using the GPS coordinates available to him. Senior Constable Price also prepared an animated map depicting the lightning strikes and their point of contact across that period, 22 to 26 November 2019. So the actual video footage of this map will be played during his evidence, with particular focus upon a lightning strike displayed on the edge of the southwestern boundary of the fireground perimeter between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. on 22 November 2019, and 3 lightning strikes displayed within the fire perimeter early in the morning on the 25th of November. In May 2022, Detective Technical Sergeant Alexander Gill of the Newcastle Crime Scene Section of New South Wales Police reviewed the evidence as to cause and origin of the Little L fire, basically a review on the papers. Detective Gill did not attend the fireground, but reviewed the available information already compiled and determined that examination of the scene would have been of little use by May 2022, given the passage of time since the fire. Detective Sergeant Gill provided his expert opinion, although qualified by the limitations inherent in the nature of the inquiry he conducted, that the Little L fire was the result of ignition by lightning strike. He based his opinion on the abundance of data indicating significant lightning activity in the area during the days prior to the determined ignition of the fire. He additionally opined that lightning strikes are a known ignition cause of wildfire should the weather, vegetation and terrain be conducive. Detective Sergeant Gill thought the impact of prolonged drought in the region and the weather in the months, weeks and days prior to the Little L fire igniting would have made the available fuel extremely dry and ideal for the spread of fire. Detective Sergeant Gill also noted that there was no evidence to suggest human presence in the vicinity of the initial fire ground within the remote National Park location. Your Honour, that's all that I wish to say by way of opening address. I'll now tender the coronial brief of evidence into the Little L complex fire, which I understand is due to be marked exhibit number 57A.
Yes, thank you. It'll be exhibit 57A.
And, Your Honour, the first witness to give evidence this morning is the officer in charge, plainclothes Senior Constable Katie Platt.
Senior Constable, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can.
All right, you'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Wilcox.
Officer, would you please state your name, rank and station?
Detective Senior Constable Katie Platt, attached to Muswellbrook Police Station.
You provided a statement to this inquiry dated 29 October 2020.
Yes.
And is everything in that statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Is there anything in that statement that you wish to amend or correct?
No.
And you were the officer in charge of the Little L complex fire investigation, correct?
Yes.
And you identified that the Little L fire started at 6:15 p.m. on the 25th of November 2019?
Yes.
And was extinguished at 12:15 p.m. on the 24th of January 2020?
Yes.
I'll return to that in a moment, but that gives a broad time frame of an active fire for about 2 months, correct?
Yes.
And that fire ran through the rural localities of Laguna, Wollombi and Paynes Crossing in the Hunter Valley within Cessnock LGA.
Yes.
Those towns being to the east of the Yengo National Park, correct?
Yes.
And it's the case, isn't it, that the Little L fire merged with a number of other fires throughout the month of December 2019?
Yes.
And the Little L fire was originally referred to as the Stockyard Flat Fire, but renamed Little L Fire at 4:24 p.m. on the 25th of November 2019?
Yes.
And at the time that the Little L fire started, the much larger Gospers Mountain fire was burning broadly to the southwest of the Little L fire, correct?
Yes.
And in the course of your investigation, you obtained some weather data from the Bureau of Meteorology?
Yes.
And that told you that there were 16 severe thunderstorm warnings issued for the Hunter Valley between 22 to 25 November 2019?
Yes.
And it was your evidence that despite those warnings, there was only minimal rainfall recorded at 3 of the closest weather stations to the Little L fire, being Cooranbong, Cessnock Airport and Mangrove Mountain?
Yes.
And you received your initial information on the Little L fire from Paul Sanderlands, the National Parks and Wildlife Service air attack pilot, who first observed the Stockyard Creek fire shortly after 8 a.m. on 25 November 2019, correct?
Yes.
And he provided a GPS location of the fire that morning.
Yes.
Did you also obtain lightning strike data from the Bureau of Meteorology?
I did.
And that was in the form of an Excel spreadsheet listing lightning strike data within a 2 kilometre radius from the suspected point of ignition of the Little L fire?
Yes.
And there were several lightning strikes, weren't there, between 2:37 p.m. on the 22nd of November 2019 and 10:50 p.m. on the 25th of November 2019 within that 2 kilometre radius?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to review the statement of Detective Gill from Newcastle crime scene dated 4th of May 2022?
Yes.
He notes from your statement that the Bureau of Meteorology detailed 4,710 lightning strikes within the 2 kilometre radius of the suspected area of origin. However, he notes at paragraph 26 of his statement that he spoke with Senior Constable Price from the mapping unit, who indicated he used 526 data points for lightning strikes in his charts and videos. Are you aware of those matters? Can you account for that difference in number of lightning strikes in terms of your statement and Senior Constable Price?
Yeah, so at the time I made my statement, excuse me, I had obtained the Excel spreadsheet from Bureau of Meteorology, and I used that data to collate my statement. When I submitted that data to the mapping unit, they put it on the maps and they contacted me and said, oh, I think there's an error. The lightning strike all just comes up as one line. So I revisited it and got, I think Rebecca Hubbard sent me through some raw data from the Bureau of Meteorology, and I also recontacted the Bureau of Meteorology again and explained, look, this is what's happened. Could I please request additional data? And then they've provided me with another spreadsheet, and that's a spreadsheet that I then gave to Senior Constable Price.
I understand, thank you. In any event, it only takes one lightning strike to ignite a fire in most cases, doesn't it?
Correct.
Now, in terms of when the Little L fire commenced, you referred at several times in your statement to 6:15 p.m. on the 25th of November 2019. I'll just bring up page 101 of the brief, which will be displayed on screen for you to see. Hopefully, is that in a resolution where you can read it?
Sorry, I'll just...
That's all right. We'll just zoom in to the bottom left corner, incident origin details. You see there, origin date 25/11/19, time 18:15.
Yes.
I'll just bearing that in mind, I'll bring up page 184 of the brief on screen for you to have a quick look at as well. This is from fire progression mapping for what was then called the Stockyard Creek fire. Zooming into the lower part, under Little L complex, you see their first entry between 18:15 and 16:24, 25/11/19. Little L complex was named the Stockyard Creek fire.
Yeah, so is that on the screen now, is it?
Yes, so just under the heading Little L complex, the first line.
Oh, because all I can see is Kerry's Ridge and Drew's... Oh, hang on. Sorry, I didn't realise I could drag it down. Yes.
So having regard, was it those two documents or demonstrating that the Little L complex or Stockyard Creek fire was essentially started or recognised by the RFS at 6:15 p.m. on the 25th of November that led you to use that as the point at which you stated the fire started?
It did. I worked off their sit rep.
Thank you. That image can be taken away now. It's the case, though, isn't it, that Paul Sanderlands made his observations of the Little L fire not at 6:15 p.m. on the 25th of November, but rather earlier in the morning of the 25th of November?
Yes.
So you accept that the fire at Little L started sometime certainly prior to 6:15 p.m. on 25th of November 2019 and somewhat earlier? Yes.
Yes.
I'll now bring up page 197 of the brief for you to have a look at. This is from the fire progression report. You can see there, paying attention to the right-hand columns, which are the Australian Eastern Daylight Time rather than the UTC time, you can see there that there was a lightning strike within the vicinity of the Little L or Stockyard Creek fire at 7:41 p.m. on the 22nd of November 2019.
Yes.
And then moving to the next table, at 5:42 p.m. on the 25th of November 2019, there were 3 further lightning strikes in the vicinity of the Little L fire.
Yes.
However, given Mr Sanderlands' evidence that he observed the Little L fire not at 5:42 p.m. on the 25th, but rather shortly after 8 a.m. on the 25th of November, it follows, doesn't it, that those 3 lightning strikes on the 25th of November must have happened after the fire started. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So that really leaves the lightning strike on the 22nd of November as the most likely lightning strike of those for which we've received records.
Yes.
And it follows, therefore, that the Little L fire might have started as early as 22 November 2019, does it?
Correct.
I've now got page... I don't need that page, but I'm grateful that that page is showing. So that's lightning strike data for the 22nd of November to the 23rd of November, which covers that lightning strike on the afternoon of the 22nd of November. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Perhaps we could zoom in just... Oh, no, that's all right. That was the document that was shown earlier in the opening, but I'll bring up now page 16 of the brief, which is an image from your statement. So that is page 16 of the Coronial brief and paragraph 33, 34 of your statement. That's a Google map image that you obtained of the suspected area of origin of the Little L fire.
Yes.
And as you identified there, that likely area includes mountainous terrains, ridges and valleys, correct?
Yes.
And so it's a case that you noted in your statement, you noted the opinion of Mr Sanderlands that lightning strike was the cause of the ignition of the Little L fire due to the remoteness of the location and due to pedestrian or vehicular access being non-existent, correct?
Yes.
And Mr Sanderlands noted that no human interference was noted, and he said that any fire investigator would in fact have to be winched into that location to conduct a physical examination, correct?
Yes.
So do you share Mr Sanderlands' opinion that lightning strike was the most likely cause of the Little L fire?
100%.
And you said in your statement that there was nil evidence of any human interaction or vehicular access within the vicinity of the Little L fire suspected area of origin.
That's right.
And further, you stated no further information had been received to suggest an alternate ignition, i.e. suspicious circumstances?
No, nothing.
And thank you for that. So did you come across any information during the course of your investigation to suggest that something or any cause other than lightning strike was the cause or potential cause of the Little L fire?
No, nothing at all. Nothing was received.
Turning to other aspects of your investigation, you in June 2020 requested Polair to winch forensic police officers into the Little L suspected area of origin, correct?
Yes.
And a Polair was dispatched on the 15th of October 2020, correct?
Yes.
And what happened during the course of that day in respect of the Polair inspection?
Yeah, they were en route to do the crime scene examination, but they got diverted to a critical incident, a police shooting. So they obviously canned our job for the day.
Yes, and another step you took was on the 31st of March 2022, you sent a mapping request to Senior Constable Price in the mapping unit.
Yes.
You provided him with 3 locations of interest. What was the significance of those 3 locations?
Well, they were 3 locations that the Department of Communities and Justice had highlighted for me to get mapping on. And I believe one is the GPS coordinates that I refer to in my statement. The other one is Paul Sanderlands, and the other one is off the SITREP.
And those are all locations relating to the suspected ignition area of the Little L fire or fires that were observed in its immediate vicinity, were they?
Yes.
You also provided Senior Constable Price with 2 fire outlines. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
Do you recall what those 2 fires were?
Is that the line scans?
The 2 yellow lines that were used in Senior Constable Price's mapping of a fire outline.
Sorry, you might have to jog my memory.
That's all right. If you're not sure, I can move on. But you provided him the location of at least the suspected area of origin of the Little L fire for Senior Constable Price to map, correct?
Yes.
Further steps that you took were on the 7th of April 2022, you submitted requests with forensic police to provide a cause and origin statement on a Little L complex fire, correct?
Yes.
And following that, you received the statement dated 4th of May 2022 from Detective Technical Acting Sergeant Alexander Gill from Newcastle Crime Scene, correct?
Yes.
And it's the case that Detective Gill did not perform a physical examination of the fire scene, but formed an opinion on the basis of documents supplied to him. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it was his ultimate conclusion that, on the material he received, that the Little L fire was a result of ignition by lightning strike, correct?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you some brief questions about your assessment of property impacts by the Little L fire. You essentially coordinated with the forensic police to undertake an assessment of fires affected by the Little L complex fire in January 2020.
Yes.
And it's the case that the forensic police were unable to access some of the properties, correct?
That's right.
And they could not examine some properties because owners had already cleared away fire, damaged property or started a rebuild. Is that right?
Yes.
And in terms of your involvement, you worked with plainclothes Senior Constable Clinton Walsh and Wallumbye lockup keeper Senior Constable Paul Proctor, and between yourselves assessed various properties affected by Little L complex fire throughout the month of January 2020.
Yes.
And in terms of those property impacts, you were also assisted by members of Strikeforce Toronto, who followed up residents with telephone and email inquiries, correct?
Yes.
And the result of your investigation of property impacts was the compilation of a master Excel spreadsheet, correct?
Yes.
And do you agree that it contains 4 destroyed properties, 12 destroyed outbuildings, and 14 damaged properties?
Yes.
That gives an equal of 30 properties or buildings impacted. And you also extracted at paragraph 46 of your brief a table from some of those spreadsheet entries, did you?
Yes.
Do you agree with me you featured 27 properties in that table?
Yes.
But it's the case that those are a summary and the Excel spreadsheet is the authoritative version of the properties that were damaged or impacted by the Little L complex fire, correct?
That's right.
And finally, given that there were some issues of access to properties or some residents didn't respond to your inquiries, the spreadsheet that you obtained represents the best effort of your investigation as to the scope of damage, properties damaged or destroyed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Excuse me for a moment. No further questions.
Ms Woodland, you have any
No
questions?
questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Senior Constable. You're excused.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Ms Ward.
Your Honour, the next witness is Mr Paul Sanderlands. He should be waiting for us in the virtual lobby room.
Mr Sandylands, can you see and hear us in the courtroom? Mr Sandylands? Mr Sandylands, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can, Your Honour.
We'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank
Thank you.
Mr Sanderlands, I'm wondering if you have the facility to turn on the camera on the device that you're using. We can't see you. We can only, this might work. Good.
Yeah.
All right, can you still see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great. All right, thank you. Would you state your name, occupation and professional address?
My name's Paul Jonathan Sandylands. Currently an assistant project officer with the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service. My work address is the National Parks Office at 2156 Putty Road at Bulga, New South Wales.
At Bulga, was that?
Bulga, yes, Bulga, New South Wales.
Mr Sanderlands, do you have qualifications to supervise operations as part of an incident management team responding to bushfires?
Yes, I do. Some time ago, I completed a level 2 operations officer course. I've also completed the divisional commanders course and numerous other courses which lead up to that. I'm also a qualified air attack supervisor.
Yes, and is it in your capacity as a qualified air attack supervisor that you had some involvement in the initial reporting of the fire now known as the Little L fire, then called the Stockyard Creek fire?
Yes, that's correct.
In that capacity, have you provided a statement to assist Her Honour dated the 24th of June 2020?
Yes, I have.
Is there anything within that statement that you wish to amend before we go further with your evidence today?
No, not that I can see.
And are the contents of the statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Mr Sanderlands, the first set of questions I'm going to ask you really focus upon your responsibilities as Air Attack Supervisor in the Hunter region in November 2019. Could you just briefly outline the main role of the Air Attack Supervisor prior to a Section 44 declaration having been made for any particular fire?
Yep, an Air Attack Supervisor is predominantly a person who directs and supervises aircraft for firefighting activities. The main roles are to do reconnaissance of known or fires that are detected, develop a plan or a strategy to deal with that fire, in consultation with an incident management team, advise them on what resources would be needed, both on the ground and as part of an air attack strategy. An air attack supervisor would direct aircraft that are suitable for attacking a fire, both rotary wing aircraft and fixed wing aircraft. Air attack supervisors could also provide intelligence and situation reports to an incident management team to provide updates and help develop further strategies and long-term goals as far as managing that fire. An air attack supervisor would also, or can also, provide mapping the shape of the fire, where control methods and activities have occurred. And the air attack...
I'm sorry, you finish your answer.
I have, thanks.
It stands to reason, doesn't it, that the air attack supervisor might be deployed to coordinate efforts in response to one fire where a Section 44 declaration has already been made, and in the course of undertaking those duties might report in new fires or fresh ignitions that had not previously been reported.
Yeah, that's correct. Quite often, particularly where there's been a lightning storm or storms go through an area with lightning, one fire may be detected and could be worked on for a number of days. And then following that, other fires could be detected, depending on how long it takes a lightning strike to develop and be seen and detected for the purpose of firefighting.
Is this a fair summary of your work as air attack supervisor in November of 2019? Firstly, you were initially in the air on the lookout for new fires even before a Section 44 declaration was in force for the Gospers Mountain fire?
Yes, that's correct.
Then there came a point in time when a Section 44 declaration was made for the Gospers Mountain fire, and your role as air attack supervisor changed somewhat once that declaration was made?
I guess the nuts and bolts of the actual role doesn't change a whole lot. However, given the size and nature of the role, an air attack supervisor might be given a section of the fire to deal with multiple or other air attack supervisors. You may also be used for other tasks, such as helping to direct extraction and infill activities for ground crews that are entering a fireground by aircraft, or do multiple things that contribute towards the overall firefighting effort.
All right. Moving then to the period of time when a Section 44 declaration had been made for the Gospers Mountain fire, were you appointed to the incident management team based out of Wilberforce?
Yes, that's correct. I was the air attack supervisor north for that activity.
And is that because, as you've just told Her Honour, once a Section 44 declaration is made, a decision might also be made to divide air attack supervisor responsibilities between different sectors of the fire?
Yes, that's correct. Given the large or the size of the fire and considering the span of control for that role, it can be divided up to either geographically or by aircraft types or types of activities for people to do different jobs.
So you were appointed the air attack supervisor for the northern sector of the Gospers Mountain fire?
Yes, that's correct.
And did that have you in the vicinity of the area around Yengo National Park and Stockyard Creek?
Yes, it did.
You say in your statement, Mr. Sanderlands, that you were then essentially on loan to a subunit which had been created at Bulga, B-U-L-G-A. Do you recall saying that in your statement?
Yes, that's correct.
And you've told the court this morning, haven't you, that Bulga is in fact where you are based with the National Parks and Wildlife Service?
Yes, that's correct.
Where is Bulga physically in relation to nearby townships that we might have heard of?
So in the Hunter Valley, it's on the southern edge of the Hunter Valley. It's directly south of Singleton and more or less east of Cessnock. And the town of Broke is approximately 20 kilometres or so to the east of Bulga.
Thank you. You say in your statement that you were the air attack supervisor for the northern sector of the Gospers Mountain fire, but you were also dealing with fires outside of the Gospers Mountain declaration area. Do you recall saying that?
Yes, that's correct.
Does that mean you also had a role in relation to fires where no Section 44 declaration was presently in force?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And what was broadly speaking, the geographical reach that you were covering as air attack supervisor in this role? Obviously covering the northern sector of the Gospers fire, but what was the broad reach of the other areas you were patrolling?
Basically, if you can imagine the northern side of the fire burning within the Yengo Wallamai National Park, reaching as far as sort of Jerry's Plains around to Buckety, off towards the east of the fire. But if you look at the fires in a landscape context, it covered the additional fires covered the area in Yengo National Park into the northern part of Yengo National Park.
You say in your statement that you were working on 6 different fires and supervising firefighting activities on all of those fires, and you were responsible for supervising aerial crews working across these fires. Do you recall saying that? It's in paragraph 15. Okay. What aerial crews were available to you as at the 25th of November 2019?
I had a number of contract type aircraft, helicopters that had a water bucketing capability. So they were deployed across the different fire grounds.
Do you recall how many helicopters? Just trying to understand the number of appliances that might have been available.
I don't recall at this time, no.
More than 5, less than 50?
More than 5. Yeah, more than 5.
And you couldn't set an upper limit?
Not at this time. I can't recall.
All right. So you told Her Honour about the water bucketing helicopters. What other sorts of aerial appliances?
Immediately we had water bucketing aircraft that we were using. Later on, for the Little L fire, arrangements were made for a large air tanker, a very large air tanker, to deliver retardant for the Little L fire. So we had aircraft that were used for bucketing and crew insertion that were working away. And later on in the day, a very large air tanker was deployed on the Little L fire.
So that VLAT fire, the very large air tanker used to execute a retardant run, was that available to you sometime later in the day on the 25th of November 2019?
Yes, it was.
And aside from the very large air tanker and the contract type helicopters, were there other aerial appliances available to you in the initial period?
Helicopters were at a premium at the time. So the aircraft that we had, we used them as we could on the different fires. So we might have, depending on the type of activity, the fire behaviour, we'd deploy the aircraft where we needed them. And then once the situation changed on any particular fire, we'd then redirect them onto other priority areas.
So is it fair to say they were being moved around across several fires, including the northern sector of Gospers?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Mr. Sanderlands, I'm now going to ask you some questions focused upon your initial observations of the fire that we know as the Little Elf Fire. You deal with this in paragraph 16 of your statement. Can I firstly ask you, when did you first become aware of a fire burning in the Stockyard Creek area?
I was advised when I was at the incident management team location at Bulga by the staff there that there was a fire, a new fire in that area. I went down.
Just let me stop you there. Was that on the 25th of November or the day prior? Do you know?
On the 25th of November, yes.
And we assume that must have been sometime early in the morning because you've actually reported the fire in by about 8 a.m.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were told by someone at the incident management team at Bulga. Can you recall what you were told?
I was advised that there was a new fire in Stockyard Creek, and that I should go down and have a look at that as a priority.
Do you know when that was first reported to the incident management team?
No, I don't.
And do you know who made the first report of the fire to the incident management team?
I don't know who reported it to the incident management team. However, I do recall a conversation with staff at the incident management team about the fire.
If you don't know, just say so. But is it likely that the person who first reported the fire to the incident management team would have had to have seen it from the air?
I don't know.
In any event, in response to that report, did you then travel out by air to the scene where this new ignition in the Yengo National Park had been reported as burning?
Yes, the aircraft that was allocated to me for the day, the pilot and myself flew down, had a look at the fire, and did a quick size up and did a situation report to the incident management team at Bulga.
Did that result in you producing an image on your iPad where you inserted pin locations representing fires in the field?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I'm just going to have that image brought up on screen, Mr. Sanderlands. It's the image that sits within paragraph 16 of your statement, page 38 of the brief. Can you see that on the screen where you are?
Yes, I can.
All right. Now, there seem to be 3 small red icons marked on that image, one as house fire, the next bearing the word water, and then a third red image to the northeast of those 2 fires. Am I interpreting that map correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Do those 3 icons represent the 3 fires that you first identified in the general area during your flyover on the morning of the 25th?
No, the centre icon with water indicates that there's a water source there, and then the other 2 pins represent the 2 of the fires.
All right. You say within your statement at paragraph 16 that you identified there were 3 fires in the general area?
Yes, that's correct.
Where was the 3rd fire if it's not presently marked on this map?
I can't recall, but it was in the broader area of the that area of the national park.
If we deal firstly with the fire marked as house fire, did that fire already have the name of house fire at the time of the time you created the image at 8:05 a.m?
No, that's the name that we gave it, given the
Thank you.
Given the proximity to the Howes Trail.
And Howes Trail, did you say?
Yes, that's correct. Just above the fire location is a trail, and it's the Howes Trail.
So does the Howes Trail move through the Yengo National Park?
Yes, it does. It wiggles its way from basically the Putty Road through to the eastern side of Yengo National Park.
Does the point of the Howes Trail, I withdraw that. Did the Howes fire ignite within National Park territory?
I believe so, yes.
And was that area accessible on foot, in your opinion?
It was quite steep terrain from the trail, and I do recall vaguely that crews visited that fire via vehicle later on, but it wasn't a priority for us or for me at the time, given my priority was the Little L fire.
Yes. All right. Then where on this map is the Little L ignition displayed?
The Little L fire ignition is the red flag on the right-hand side of the map. You can see what looks like an administration boundary which leads up to that flag or that pin, and it's unnamed.
Okay, so it's the red flag to the top right of the map.
That's correct.
What was, if you can recall, what was the approximate distance between the Howes fire and the fire that became known as the Stockyard Creek fire?
In a direct line, it's about 4 kilometres.
Okay. Would it be possible for someone walking through the national park to use the Howes Trail near the scene of the Howes fire to trek across to the vicinity of the site of the Stockyard Creek ignition?
It would be possible, yes.
Can you say whether or not it is a trail that's regularly used by hikers or National Parks and Wildlife staff, or whether it's a trail that takes people past any well-known landmarks or anything of the kind?
The Howes Trail is an open trail. It's for park management and for visitor use. It takes you to a number of places across the broader national park landscape. It's open 24 hours a day, and with the usual restrictions of registered motor vehicles and driving within the conditions.
I'm just trying to get to the position of how likely it is that someone might access the terrain in the vicinity of the Stockyard Creek ignition by working their way in off the Howes Fire Trail. Can you help us understand whether or not that would be a difficult proposition or a stroll in the park, literally?
The vegetation that I saw there is typical sandstone country, which is quite steep and difficult to walk around in. There was an old, or there appeared to be an old trail marked on an old map that I looked at, and however that trail is long overgrown and hasn't been used by anyone using a motor vehicle for quite a long time, many years.
Is that the vehicle trail you refer to in your statement?
That's correct. When I say vehicle trail, I just mean that like the cuttings for the trail are still there. However, there's tall vegetation growing on the surface of the trail, so it's impossible to drive a motor vehicle along it. Given it is on a ridge.
Certainly not a trail maintained by National Parks and Wildlife Service.
No, not at all.
Now I interrupted you. You're about to say something's on a ridge?
The trail is on a ridge line. A person could, with skills and experience, could walk along that area, but I believe it'd be highly unlikely.
Okay. I'm now going to have a second image that you produced, Mr. Sanderlands, brought up on screen. It's the image that sits within paragraph 18 of your statement, page 39 of the brief. Can you see it there on the screen in front of you?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Is that an image that you created about 2.5 hours later when you again flew over and around the perimeter of the fire?
Yes, it is.
Could you give the court an estimate of how much the fire had grown across that 2.5 hour period?
Okay, so just looking at the image, you can see the straight lines on the top side of the fire where the blue line is. You can see a line there. On both sides of the image, you can see another line. So that's basically a kilometre square, if you like.
Yes.
So the fire's grown to about 2.5 hectares from the point of when we first saw it to that time.
And is it fair to say, Mr. Sanderlands, that you again flew over the scene later that day at about 5 p.m. in the afternoon?
Yes, that's correct.
And had the Stockyard Creek fire again grown in size despite efforts to try and contain it through water bombing, use of water bombing helicopters?
Yes, indeed.
And again, you mapped the fire at 5 p.m. and sent that through to the incident management team. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. I want to now ask you some questions to get your opinion about the likely cause of the Stockyard Creek fire. Firstly, was this part of the Yengo National Park familiar to you prior to the fire?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
I will. Was this part of the Yengo National Park familiar to you prior to the fire?
Yes, I've been in that area quite a few times. Not the exact area, but the general area of Yengo National Park.
So do you tell the court you have a broad understanding of the terrain around the suspected area of origin for the fire?
Yes.
And you also have a broad understanding, do you, assisted by your review of old maps after the fire had passed through, of the various tracks and trails that might pass in the general vicinity of the fire?
Yes.
Is it fair to say, Mr. Sanderlands, that your theory as to what caused the fire is largely based on the fact that the scene of ignition was so remote, it largely eliminates the possibility of human interference or human cause for the fire?
Yes, that's right.
You might not be able to definitively exclude all human cause in the absence of a scene investigation, but would you agree that the remoteness means it's unlikely that it was caused by something such as campfire or debris burning or smoking or things of that nature?
Yes, that's correct.
And indeed, during your 3 flyovers in the course of the 25th of November, did you see anything to suggest human activity in the vicinity of the Stockyard Creek fire?
No, I didn't.
Now, on your hypotheses, does that leave lightning as the most probable cause for the fire?
Yes.
If it transpires that the lightning strike data shows lightning in the area on the 22nd of November, prior to your observation of the fire on the 25th of November, does that make lightning as a potential cause more or less likely?
More likely.
And why is that?
Well, lightning fires, when lightning hits the ground or hits a tree, it doesn't immediately start a fire. A fire could sit for any length of time before it takes a run and expands. A tree could smoulder for a couple of days and then not and go undetected for that time until the fire grows and joins the vegetation around it, and then produces smoke, and then obviously people can become aware of it.
And is it particularly the case that in a remote area like the Yengo National Park, The fire might smoulder or even burn for some days before anyone physically observes it because it's so
yes.
remote.
Absolutely, yes.
So the mere fact that lightning is recorded in the area on the 22nd of November but not reported until sometime around the 25th of November does not detract from the theory that this is a fire caused by lightning.
That's correct.
Your Honour, those are my questions for Mr Sanderlands.
Thank you. Ms Woodland, do you have any questions?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thank you very much, Mr Sandylands. You're excused now.
Thank you very much, Your Honour.
Your Honour, there's one final witness to give evidence in this inquiry. We're in Your Honour's hands as to whether or not you'd like to press on and hear from the Senior Constable or take the morning tea adjournment. I think he should be available.
I'm
in the
happy
waiting room.
to press on if everyone else is.
Thank you, Your Honour. Mr Wilcox will take this witness.
Thank you, Mr Wilcox.
I call Senior Constable Yost Price.
Senior Constable, can you see and hear us in the courtroom? Senior Constable Price, can you see and hear us? You might be on mute. Senior Constable Price, can you see and hear us? Here we go. Senior Constable Price, can you see and hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you and see you.
Thank you. You'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr Wilcox.
Would you please state your name, rank and station?
Jost Ingo Price, currently acting Senior Sergeant, Police Headquarters, State Intelligence Command Mapping Unit.
You provided a statement to this inquiry dated the 5th of April 2022, did you?
That's correct.
Is everything in that statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Do you wish to amend or correct anything within that statement?
No.
Could you describe to the court your role within New South Wales Police?
Yes, I'm part of the mapping unit, and we produce maps mainly for court or other big events like New Year's Eve, or we produce maps which show local or police area commands.
Can you describe your training and experience in producing those maps?
Of course, I'm with the mapping unit since September 2016, and I have completed several courses which are concerning the use of several software versions. The one we use most is ArcGIS Pro, which I also used for this project.
This project emanated from a request dated 31 March 2022 from Plainclothes Senior Constable Katie Platt, who's the officer in charge of the Little L complex fire. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you generated mapping of the suspected area of origin of the Little L fire and overlaid that with lightning strikes recorded within 4 kilometres of that location between 22 November and 26 November 2019, did you?
That's correct.
And the request concerned 3 locations of interest, did it?
Yes, correct.
Can you say what the significance of those 3 locations were or why they were selected?
I can't.
At this stage, I'll play the video that you generated as part of the mapping request. That played rather quickly, but can you briefly explain to the court what that video is that you generated?
Yes, the video is a time-lapse video which shows 1 hour steps between the 22nd and the 26th. And within these 1 hour steps, all the data points which fall within that time period will be shown on the map.
And the data points are lightning strikes, are they?
That's what I got told by Senior Constable Platt.
You also produced some static images that you included in your statement, namely 3 images of that same area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Returning to the video, I'll have it paused at 0.01 seconds, but with the timestamp demonstrating 22 November 2019 between 8 and 9 a.m. Can you see that?
Yes.
So that is a still which shows lightning strikes on the 22nd of November 2019 between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., correct?
That's correct.
Have you had an opportunity to confirm that the time in the top left, whether that's Universal Time or Australian Eastern Daylight Time?
I looked at the original file I received, and the only heading there was date in one column, in the second column was time, and the third column latitude, fourth longitude, and then in the last column was amp. So I cannot confirm if that is universal time or if it's this local time.
Do you accept that if it is universal time, that translates to 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. on the 22nd of November 2019?
As I said, I cannot confirm what time I received in that Excel spreadsheet.
In any event, this image has a yellow outline in the centre. What does that represent?
I received a JPEG image of outlines of what I got told are areas of the fire, extents of the fire. This JPEG I overlaid onto the map I produced and then sketched the outline of these fires onto the map. So I have to assume these are the outlines of fires as I got told by Senior Constable Platt, and I have sketched them into the map. So they are the approximate locations of the provided data I received from Senior Constable Platt.
So it also shows, so we can see here 2 yellow fire outlines, one of which
Yes.
is impacted by 2, almost 3 lightning strikes in the centre, and the other impacted by none at all at this hour in time. Is that correct?
That's how I would interpret it, yes.
And the 3 areas of interest are the 3 large circles at 2 kilometres in pink and 4 kilometres in white spread around that map, correct?
Sorry, the 3 locations of interest are the marked dots, and they have a 2 kilometre radius around each other and a 4 kilometre radius around each other.
And those dots are coloured red on the left, blue on the top right, and then green within the yellow fire area. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
I'll now take the video to another screenshot, which is 0 minutes, 18 seconds, timestamp 25 November 2019 between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. You can see that, can you?
Yes.
And you agree this is a visual representation of 25 November between 6 and 7 a.m.
Yes.
And here, again, the yellow area, which is to the right of the screen, now has about 4 lightning strikes inside it with several nearby.
Yes.
And then the other yellow fire area has no lightning strikes near it.
Sorry, I should clarify in this case, only lightning strike data was selected, which is within the 4-kilometer radius of any of these circles.
Thanks
That
for
means
clarifying.
everything outside these 4-kilometer circles was excluded.
I understand.
Therefore, yes.
Yes, and therefore the lightning strikes on this video are only those which were recorded within the 4-kilometre radius of the 3 points of interest.
Yes, that's correct.
Again, you might not be able to assist, but if the timestamp there of 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. is universal time, it follows that the Australian daylight time, Eastern Daylight Time for the 25th of November is actually 5 to 6 p.m. Can you say that, or you can't say it off the top of your head?
It would be plus 11 hours in this case. Yes, so it would be 1600 to 1800 hours.
And could I just go back, if it's possible, to the last one, just bearing that calculation in mind? Here we have again what I previously showed you, so it's paused at 22 November 2019 between 8 and 9 a.m, applying 11 hours. Do you agree that takes it to 7 p.m. to 8 p.m, same date?
Yes.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Your Honour.
Thank you. Ms Woodlands, do you have any questions?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Acting Senior Sergeant. You're now excused.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Your Honour, that concludes the evidence in the Little L Fire Complex inquiry. Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material contained within the brief of evidence tendered as Exhibit 57A, as well as the oral testimony of plainclothes Senior Constable Katie Platt, the police officer in charge, Acting Senior Sergeant Yost Price, Mapping Operations, New South Wales Police, and Paul Sanderlands, Project Officer at National Parks and Wildlife Service. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address Your Honour on the cause and origin of the Little L Complex fire. In that regard, I can foreshadow that formal submissions are likely to be made that the fire commenced as a result of a lightning strike on or before the morning of 25 November 2019 in bushland in the Yengo National Park near Stockyard Creek. GPS coordinates latitude, longitude 33 degrees 56.248 minutes south and 151 degrees 00.906 seconds east. And I seek to formally stand the matter over to 5 September 2022.
Yes, the matter is stood over to 5 September 2022. Thank you, Mr Wilcox. Unless there's anything else, we will adjourn until tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.
Thank you.